Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
What is up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to have back on the show for another incredible appearance, survivor and child abuse advocate, podcaster and content creator, woman of God, independent researcher, investigative journalist, and educator, and one of my absolute favorite people and dear friends, Jaymee Jay. A little bit about Jaymee in case you're new here, or if you somehow have missed any of her incredible previous episodes on this channel, and a little bit about what we will be talking about today. Jaymee's journey, forged in the fires of a challenging upbringing of traditional family dysfunction, has uniquely shaped her into a beacon of brilliance and compassion, lighting up and inspiring the paths of countless lives with her remarkable achievements. With a world of possibilities at her fingertips, she could have chosen any pursuit to invest her boundless energy, intellect, and voice. Yet, in an act of unparalleled selflessness, Jaymee has devoted herself fully to unraveling the complexities of SRA, mind control, and organized abuse, serving as a tireless advocate for survivors and whistleblowers of these heinous crimes against humanity. I personally stand in absolute awe of her unwavering resolve to step into this war, a battle she could have easily observed from a safe distance, never uttering a word. To me, Jaymee is nothing short of a hero, fearlessly raising her voice as an ally, fully aware of the risks, the targets it paints on her back, and the absence of any material reward. Her courage is a clarion call, a testament to bravery that resonates deeply with me, and I know all of you. And I know it'll stir the same reverence in all of you, whether you're a survivor or not. She's a warrior of compassion, justice, education, and love. In today's podcast episode, Jaymee turns her compassionate gaze to one of the most insidious threads woven into every abuse survivor's journey: the suffocating weight of shame and the weaponization of shame. This silent saboteur shadows journeys from the first whisper of violation to the fragile steps towards freedom, binding survivors in chains of self-doubt and isolation. During the actual abuse itself, perpetrators wield shame as their cruelest weapon, gaslighting victims into believing they invited the harm or somehow deserved it, instilling a toxic narrative that the survivor's very essence is flawed and unworthy. It lingers like a venomous fog, compelling many to bury their truths deep within, where silence becomes both a prison and a protector. Studies show that over 75% of female sexual abuse survivors grapple with this trauma-related shame, often delaying disclosure for years or even decades. And when survivors finally summon the insurmountable courage it takes to speak out, as they must, to reclaim their lives and to be set free, the world too often recoils with its own arsenal of shame, demanding irrefutable proof, branding them as fabricators, or layering on victim blaming that twists the knife deeper, fostering feelings of worthlessness, self-blame, and a haunting fear of judgment. In child sexual abuse, for instance, this internalized disgrace can warp a survivor's self-perception, convincing them that they merit further mistreatment. While in personal intimate partner violence, it manifests as a profound loss of identity and paralyzing guilt for staying too long. Without intervention, shame spirals into isolation, depression, self-harm, and even barriers to essential health care, as the dread of exposure keeps survivors hidden from the very support that could set them free. This is why Jaymee's exploration of shame she will be sharing with us today is nothing short of revolutionary, a lighthouse in the fog of recovery. Addressing it head-on dismantles the abuser's lingering grip, transforming distorted beliefs of guilt and inadequacy into pathways of empowerment and forgiveness. Psychoeducation and compassionate dialogue, as Jaymee champions, can corrode its very foundations, healing the wounded inner child and preventing shame from dictating a lifetime of suffering. By shining a light on this universal yet very unspoken about adversary, we shatter the stigma that benefits perpetrators, foster environments where survivors are believed and embraced from the very start, and ignite a collective healing. It's a vital conversation that doesn't just validate individual pain, it reweaves the fabric of society, ensuring no voice is silenced, no story is dismissed, and no spirit is left in the shadows. Jaymee's care in addressing this topic with us today reminds us that in naming shame, we starve it of its power, and that in liberation, we all find our wings. Before wrapping up the introduction of today's guest, I'd like to share just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, if you wanted to share any information privately with me, or if you were interested in submitting a written testimony to be featured in a Substack article, you can reach out to me via email at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com or standbysurvivors@protonmail.com. I've also started up my third and new YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to me there at the handle at Imagination Podcast Official that I am now streaming new episode premieres from weekly. Turn on your notifications and join our loving community in the live chats every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Central Time. Thank you all wholeheartedly for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. Your support means the absolute world to me and to every guest on this show. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming back today's guest of honor, hero for the children, passionate anti-abuse activist, content creator, and passionate voice for the voiceless, the one, the only, Jaymee Jay. Jaymee, it is so good to have you back. It's been a little while. I'm so excited for this episode today and so happy that you're here with us to talk about it.
Yeah, me too. I feel like it's been a while. So yeah, it's really nice to connect again. And again, thank you always for the great intros. I feel like you could just do that for a living, like how, what was the guy's name that typed up the poems on demand?
Alondra.
Alondra. Yeah, like how he can just write up. I was like, oh, I could just see Emma just like writing up this like really beautiful thing to say about people because you just have this gift for actually articulating it and just like pulling the strengths together and yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, it's really nice. So thank you.
It's an honor to get to do it, and you deserve every word. You're amazing for what you've done, and I'm just always blown away. I know survivors are absolutely mind-blowing how they're risking everything and turning against the shame that they grew up with to disclose what happened to them. It's such a big step, but they have a personal obligation that they feel because they experienced it. And it takes a really special person who didn't go through it to actually look at it, become invested in it, and then to become a voice for people who can't speak out, and then to also help people, like me who didn't grow up in it either, understand what it is. And I love how on each episode you always have different topics. You're not always saying the same information. You're always researching, and you're just a really awesome guest. My audience absolutely loves you. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kind of lead this conversation. Really excited. So again, for people listening, it's going to be a whole conversation on shame, and it's perfect for the holidays. We thought it would be really timely to do this right now with all the different, rituals and, the flashbacks and ab reactions we can anticipate becoming more frequent in our community, and just a really good uplifting kind of topic today. So I'll turn it over to you, Jaymee.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much to say. I'm just like, where do we start today? It's just such a big topic. Shame is something that affects everybody. It's not just for survivors. And so I'm not going to go into everything about shame today because there's actually really good resources online about shame. And one of the things I always try to do as a podcaster is not repeat the same information, because that's actually a pet peeve of mine. Like when people rewrite books that are really similar to other books or say the same thing on every podcast, because I feel like there's so much information now that like you have to respect people's time and attention and that they're actually listening to you. So it's like, I try to not repeat, like, you know what I mean? If people are going to listen to me, it's going to be something really different on every show. And so I just, it's just something I always try to approach things, because I realize how much content is out there right now. And I don't think anybody wants to waste time repeating stuff when we can talk about something from a new angle. And so some of my favorite stuff about shame, Brene Brown did a whole bunch of research on shame. And so I really like her stuff on shame that is really easy to look up. She has tons of TED Talks and books and stuff like that. For if you want to look at her work on shame, you know, there's the stuff on the shame spiral. There's the map of consciousness with David Hawkins talks about like shame in like the different frequencies of all the emotions and stuff. Like shame's just like the lowest frequency really that there is for humans. Another really good book on shame that I really like, and I'll explain some of the concepts in it, is this older book by John Bradshaw, The Shame That Binds You. He had some really good, really well written insights on shame in this book I really liked. And then in regards to like sexual abuse, you know, specifically shame is such an aspect of it because of the shame transfer. And another older book that's really good is this one called Secret Survivors by Sue Bloom, who really talks about like shame in regards to sexual abuse. So those are some of my favorite books on that. So yeah, I'm not going to go over everything today because like the basics, the basic kind of counseling or psychology of shame, there's just so much information out there. And it's one thing that I love about the internet is like, you know, there's so much information available to people if they want to learn themselves. Whereas like, you know, 30 years ago, you would have had to pay to go and get this information or spend a lot of time in the library. And now there's just so many great lectures and information posted online that there's just a wealth of information about shame. But specifically, I want to talk about today is like shame being used as a weapon and shame being leveraged as a means of power and control. And so shame has many, many aspects to it. The way that shame specifically relates to ritual abuse is that shame is used as a mechanism for power and control. And so I wanted to talk about that today. But again, everybody needs these constant reminders about shame because a lot of times we don't realize we're in shame. And I feel like all humans have shame. And so I just want to send out like a general kind of reminder for everybody, because it doesn't matter how much you've learned this stuff. It's like we all can kind of use a reminder of it. And then just talking specifically about how it's basically used, you know, to program people and then control their behavior later in life is kind of like more what I wanted to actually focus on today, specifically how how shame is connected to identity. So all right, so a really simple way to frame shame, like in the most simple way, is that shame has to do with your identity. So the difference between guilt and shame is guilt is that you did something bad. So guilt isn't actually bad because it means that you have a conscience. So if you do something that's out of alignment with your character or who you want to be, or something, you know, that went against your morals and values, then you have guilt. And so that's actually good. Like you say, this actually wasn't in alignment with who I am. Now I'm having emotions about it. And so therefore I can change my behavior in order to not have that feeling anymore. Whereas shame, it has to do with your identity. So shame is I am bad. I am, and it connects a lot to self-worth as well. So it's like I am worthless. I am bad. You know, it's all these things that have to do with your identity. And so if you identify as those things, it starts to actually drive your behavior. And so if you look at any, you know, defense mechanism, it's shame based. Like everything that people are trying to avoid, it's normally shame based, because shame is actually the worst feeling anybody could have. Like it's unbearable. So anytime that a person's actually feeling shame, they will do anything in their power to get out of it, including dissociation. And so when it comes to ritual abuse, like shame is used even like in the womb. Like they'll have multiple pregnancies and then they'll abort some of them, and then they'll tell the one that lived that they stole all the nutrients from the womb and that the other ones had to die for them to live, and they'll try to give them survivor's guilt. And like it starts so young. Like the shame is one of the greatest tools. Shame prevents people from doing things. So you can think about it as like little pylons of shame around a person, and a person wants to do things in their life, and the shame is like pylons stopping them from doing it. And then because shame is such a horrible feeling, like it's actually unbearable. Like not very many people could just sit in shame. Like it's it's an unbearable human feeling to have shame. So you have to do something to get out of it. And so shame is used, it's dissociative. So not all dissociation is caused by like physical torture, trauma. Like there's actual emotional dissociation, which I think is even like more powerful than physical trauma. And so shame is basically one of the main things that's used to cause dissociation. And then the people that do harm are only able to do it because they've dissociated their shame. And so a lot of people that are even willful harmers or predators without a conscience, they don't sit around and think about like that they abused a child that day or something. Like they actually do put it in a compartment, because if they actually were honest with themselves and got past their own defense mechanisms, they would feel shame. And so part of the reason they're able to keep doing it is because they've dissociated off their shame. So shame kind of works as, you know, like the thing that holds everything else in place. I call it like the pin in the fire hydrant that like holds together all the other programming, all the behaviors, all the like everything in the subconscious. Is like shame really is the key to everything. And sorry, that was a big blurb, and so I'll just let you comment on that and then we'll go from there.
That's a really good way to phrase that I haven't personally heard come up very often about guilt and shame. I think they typically get used interchangeably, and I think they really do. You can't really have one with the other a lot of times. They do often come in pairs. However, I think it can be misconstrued what each one is. And I think that's a really powerful way to look at this in the context of ritual abuse specifically, with this being just something that is so deeply embedded subconsciously, and that the things that were said to shame them because they were dissociative, it actually dissociates from their mind, and it's not something that they're aware of. And it's very fascinating too how you bring up how that's sort of like the linchpin with abusers. You know, it's like that light just turns off in them, and it turns them into a psychopath. Like without shame and compassion, those are like the two things that like create our humanity and our ability to look at something and know it's wrong. If you don't have those things, and if you're separated from it, you know, even guilt sometimes isn't enough to make somebody stop doing something. Like alcoholics feel guilty all the time, but they continue to do it because they're pushing their shame away. You know, they're creating a distance between the guilt and shame, which usually that's where the change comes, kind of whenever they can unite, you know. But if you have just one coming up, you know, if you are only dealing with guilt, or if you can suppress and dissociate guilt as well, you know, as shame, you can see how it can be a mechanism where somebody can be turned into a psychopath very easily, because all that they're left with are these emotions that aren't something that compels us to stop doing harm, or to feel an emotion when we're confronted with it.
Yeah, and a lot of I know that, you know, MK Ultra programmers like want, and they have some success with specifically segregating different emotions. And but normally in a human being, you don't just get to pick and choose what you're going to dissociate. So somebody that starts, and somebody in alcohol addiction is a really good example, because they're self-medicating their ego states and their shame states. And so, but when they do that, it starts changing their like personality and behavior, because like, and it makes people also not be able to feel joy and all these other emotions. So like when you start blocking off like your guilt and your shame and stuff, instead of actually processing it, if you're just kind of dissociating from the awareness of it, then it also cuts you off from all the good emotions like care and connection. And so it's more of like a blanket. You're either cut off or connected, right? And so with ritual abuse, the whole goal is to cut people off. And so because shame is so connected to identity, and the whole point of programming is to create dissociative identity disorder. It is to intentionally disorder somebody's identity. The shame is such a key aspect as one of their tools, not only to kind of do the fracturing, but then also to keep the fracturing in place. Because once a person has identified with the shame and internalized it, they'll actually self-regulate their own behavior based on those shame pylons, like that, like you said in the beginning, like preventing people from getting help, even like with ritual abuse, like they'll make people complicit or believe they're complicit. And, and that will make people feel so shameful that they don't ever believe they could be forgiven or could be accepted, or they actually won't even ask for forgiveness when they could be forgiven, but they actually won't even feel worthy to ask because they've already judged themselves as unworthy or forsaken or irredeemable. And so they are the ones that actually won't even like ask or even like allow themselves to receive it if it's offered because of their decision they've already made. And a lot of that is programmed in. And so with sexual abuse specifically, that's one of the main reasons that they use sexual abuse. Like I still think sexual abuse is the like the most effective way to do the damage. Like it's like there's so much research on it, and that's specifically why they do it. Like, and that like there's no better way to cause harm to a human being is sexual abuse of a child. And like that's specifically why they do it. It's not just like a fetish or a perversion. It's like a very deliberate tool because it is the most effective for what their goals are. And so with sexual abuse, it really is kind of the key to creating the dissociative identity disorder. And even if somebody just has it from like a reactive dissociative identity disorder, from not where somebody's doing it deliberately, I've never, sexual abuse is always part of it. Like that is really what it comes down to because of the way it interferes with the identity. And a lot of times, sorry, am I talking too much? Should I take a break? Okay,
No, go ahead.
Okay, so something to remember about sexual abuse, and actually this book kind of goes into it really well about that, is the way that so children have like auras and energy fields, and like when a little baby's born, it doesn't really have a sense of self. Like it is their emotions. It is like they need to be mirrored by the parent in order to have a sense of self. And it always reminds me of the Velveteen Rabbit fairy tale, where that was like of that little rabbit, but he needed to be loved to be real. And that always stuck in my head about programming, is because if a baby's not loved, and a baby feels loved by being mirrored and having their emotions, and to them, like even being hungry is an emotion. So like when they have that mirrored and attuned to, that's what makes them feel loved and real. And so in programming, they'll like on purposely interfere with that because the child actually won't feel like it's real. Like it'll have derealization, depersonalization, and then dissociation because it wasn't actually mirrored. So it doesn't actually feel real. And so they do this on purpose. And so a child has like an aura, and when a pedophile abuses a child, it actually like it invades their actual auric field and their energy field. And there's like an exchange because pedophiles are shamed based, and it's a shamed based behavior, which is also connected to narcissism, which is also a shamed based behavior. And so when sexual abuse occurs, there's like an exchange where that person like basically transfers their shame to the child. And because children are egocentric, they identify with the shame, and it interferes with their sense of self. And that's why a lot of people who have been sexually abused actually kind of feel sorry for their abuser or protect their abuser or have like extreme empathic attunement, because and when I say empathic, I don't just mean being like a person who has empathy. I mean a person who actually doesn't have a sense of self where they feel like other people's feelings are their feelings because they don't have a clear defined boundary. And that can actually happen from sexual abuse. So and like they know this, and they do it specifically on purpose to bond and trauma bond the person that's being abused as a child, and that they almost become one with the abuser. And another thing that's really important is that even though children don't have a sense of self, they're still egocentric. So they take responsibility for everything. So when something bad happens to them, they think it's because they're bad. And then they actually think they had more power than they did. So another thing, like certain things that people can have shame about, is they can feel like they should have done something they didn't, which is false because they didn't have the options to do it. They feel like they should have been stronger to prevent things or say no when they couldn't. They might have been in fight or flight. And so there's a lot of like self-shame and self-blame that goes to like actually believing a person had more agency than they did, because that's how children are. And a lot of times also when pedophiles like abuse, it's because they're narcissistic, because they feel like they did something to deserve their abuse when they were a children. And so they kind of like hate their own inner child, and then they actually think that the child that they're abusing actually somehow like has agency and like deserves, because they believe they deserved it. And I just want to be really, really clear that I'm not saying everybody who's been abused becomes an abuser, because most people don't. But I'm talking about people who have been abused and then they kind of like dissociate and rationalize and have a reaction formation where they normalize the shame and say, oh, it wasn't that bad. It happened to me. And then they start fetishizing wanting to do it. And then they think it's okay because they think that child deserves it the way they deserved it. And I'm not saying everybody's like that. I just want to be really, really clear. I'm not blanket statementing anybody that's an abuser or has been abused, but there is a certain type of person, like, and specifically the people that do this, like on an industrial scale, like people that are involved with ritual abuse, like there are people like that who are doing that. And it all ties into shame-based behavior all around.
That's such a good way to word that. Oh my goodness. There's definitely a correlation between childhood and abuse. And we see that happen all the time whenever you're listening to ritual abuse survivors talk about generationally how this can be passed down. That can be such a foreign thing to somebody who didn't grow up in a hostile environment, to be like, what do you mean adults are passing down abuse? That just sounds absolutely absurd and crazy. Like, why would you pass anything like that down? Why would nobody stand up and say no? But you see how intricately woven these different emotions are to each other. And really, it's like the darkest and the brightest emotions are locked together. You know, you don't have the kind of logic, the strength and confidence to latch on to the shame and the guilt of what you're doing, to where you can feel in a place to stand up for yourself. Like you said, your agency is taken away, and what you're left with is this shame imposed on you by your abuser, and then also the abuser's love bombing and the trauma bond that you have. So you have sort of like this absolute darkness married with this light point, and you see how it can sort of come together and create kind of the perfect monster to continue this cycle, because there's not that rationale between the emotions like how there would be in a normal loving environment. It's all twisted and inverted. And then you see how somebody can grow up without being, without feeling the shame and guilt for that, and healing that and dealing with it. When they just stuff it down, if they felt that they maybe weren't in control in their childhood, which many of these survivors are not, they have their control completely stripped from them. You see them trying to relive that instance in their life over and over and over again, even though it doesn't give them any more control. It's just that psychopathic sort of adult perspective of being your inner child and those dissociated parts of yourself coming forward and trying to now control another child, because that is what makes you feel powerful. It's not trying to control an adult. It's not trying to control anything else except the little person that you were once. And so you try to take that control back by reenacting what was done to you. And so you see how it's like just this psychological cycle too, that's incredibly sad that people go through, you know, because again, we're not empathizing with abusers either here. What's wrong is wrong. We see plenty of people who, you know, contend with what they did and get free from it and heal and become amazing people. There is no excuse for continuing abuse, but you see how healing and feeling shame and having actual human emotions come up that can create change in behavior and patterns. You know, if somebody is completely disconnected from that and all that they're living in is a spiral of their identity being taken from them, having no control over their life, no agency, being so separated from the emotions, you know, you see how somebody could try as an adult then when they're finally on their own to try to regain the things that were taken from them by reenacting it unconsciously in their own life, and they end up being, you know, the exact person that harmed them as a child.
Yeah, it's the psychology of it is really there's just so much projection, you know what I mean? Like it's and even like, and I'm not specifically talking about MK Ultra, but like more, I'm talking about like more kind of grooming pedophiles. Like they just really project onto the child that like they wanted it, because it's like they almost in their own egocentric, damaged inner child think they wanted it, even though they didn't. But like somehow that actually rationalizes it to them, where they can have psychic relief from the like the anxiety of it. So it's like a really dangerous thing if people do that, because it does end up to people, you know, think it wasn't that bad. And in cults, they do something called a strategic integration where, so like they'll fracture the child as it's developing, and then they'll kind of bring it back together in a certain way where the person remembers, like, or in their mind thinks that like, oh, my programming made me better and it made me smarter and it made me able to do these things I couldn't do. And so it wasn't that bad. And I just had to go through this stuff in order to get there. And like, you even see this like with, people going through hard stuff, like being in the Navy SEALs or being in martial arts, like people just have this like, oh, it was for my good. Right. And so, you know, they do have a way. I've read in multiple books that like good programmers do know how to do strategic integration, like, and really keep that shame dissociative. And so I think they can, like I said, you can't just like you can't just pick and choose which emotions you're going to dissociate, but like with a really skilled programmer in hypnosis and stuff, they actually do have ways of like controlling that more than an average person could. And so a really good example is like really professional porn stars and stuff. Like if you think about like how abnormal that actually is to be able to be fully naked and like feel absolutely no embarrassment or humiliation or anything, and like just like to think about how like against nature that is, to just not have any sense of being exposed at all, like just like it not affecting them at all, to just absolutely be like completely intimate in front of like any number of people watching them. Like I always try to tell people like nobody would be able to do that without going through a series of things happening to them in order to get them to that state. Like that's not a natural state of just being absolutely like shameless. And so this is why I really like this John Bradshaw book, because he talks about why people actually act shameless. And so it really connects to programming, because human beings have like thresholds, right? And so when they're doing ritual abuse, they're applying, whether it's physical pain, emotional, pain, any type of thing that's unbearable for a human being. Like human beings can only take so much until they split off a new piece of consciousness, right? And so the extreme end of that is dissociation, where a person's, being tortured to the point of splitting off new pieces of their actual consciousness. But, in general, all humans do that. So like you'll see people that act really, really shameless or really without a conscience. And, I don't want to go into the whole thing about nature and nurture, because I think there's both people born psychopaths, and I think there's secondary psychopathy as well. But a lot of the secondary stuff, it comes from the opposite of where it is now. So if you look at somebody that's acting really shameless, like they have no shame, it's probably because they felt so much shame that they actually disconnected from all their shame. So again, it's like you can't really control it, even though people try to with addictions and substances and doing things to try and control like, the level of their shame. Like it's kind of like, it's more like an on or off actually. So like when people feel so much shame, it's unbearable. So they basically just cut it all off, and then they start acting really, really shameless. And I'm not trying to cut anybody down, but like there's lots of examples of people that have just lost their dignity. Like even like when you see like people, in some of these homeless camps and stuff, just like urinating in front of everybody and stuff, it's like they've actually just completely disconnected from the sense of shame and humiliation. And that's because it was obviously unbearable, and there's like a shut off valve where it hit the threshold and then dissociated, right? And so this book really, really explains that when you see people acting really, really shameless, it's because they've just had a shame cut off, right? And so that really connects to basically what programming is, because that's what they're trying to do all the time. And so something I think we could maybe talk about specifically to do with ritual abuse is like shame as driving behaviors, but then also the biggest barrier I think to people healing and getting help is the guilt and shame of forced perpetration, and then the trauma bonding to the abusers, which actually are really connected. How I was just describing about when a child's sense of self is interfered with, and then shame is attached at the same time, it kind of has a twofold effect where the person doesn't have a sense of self, and they feel the emotions of the abuser. Humanity's really got a long way to go on receiving disclosure, because it takes there's so many of those shame pylons around everybody that's been through abuse, because they even if they don't think they did anything wrong, they still feel contaminated and dirty and unworthy, and like, you know, they feel like this, it's like this residual energy of this shame. Like I said, it's like a literal shame transfer when abuse takes place. It's like they've literally just like you know, like place shame into you. And so even if some people are able to get to the point where they say, you know, this wasn't my fault, they still feel like just you know, like there's a, you know, a giant, you know, thing around them of shame that they, like, you know what I mean? So for them to even be able to get past that and take a risk on another human being, to be vulnerable and to disclose what happened to them, you know, a lot of times people aren't abused, or like you said, they like get they get blamed, like, oh, like, you're so stupid, you should have been able to figure that out, you should have got away, like, why would you tolerate it? Like, people just don't understand, like you said, the psychology of abuse, trauma bonding, attachment disorders, like all this stuff that, like, you know, it doesn't matter how smart you are, it doesn't matter how strong you are, like, these things affect people on a physiological level to where they're actually in a trance. They're actually like the same as if they have taken a drug. It's not a matter of the will or intelligence. It's really not. And if people educate themselves on that, they would have probably more, you know, at least understanding, if not compassion, for people. But you know, some people disclose their abuse, and then yeah, they're either like blamed for it, or they're not abused, or sorry, they're not believed. And then also like people, they kind of feel shameful for like not being able to get over it as well. Like, people will shame over that and say like, oh, you know, you should have been able to handle that abuse better. Like, you somehow failed to handle it if you have some type of symptom from it, like not being able to function, or like whatever your symptom might be of it, in however that presents. Like, whether some people, you know, can't hold a job, or they can't, you know, do a whole bunch of things that a regular non-traumatized person would be able to do. And then people shame that person as though they're inadequate for not being able to just take endless amounts of abuse and still be able to function normally, like as though it's something wrong with them. And I always say, like, well, where's the line on that? You know what I mean? Where is the line? Like, how much abuse could a person honestly take before something happens, you know? Like, and I just did a podcast on Aileen Wuornos, who I thought was a really good example of that, where, you know, it's like, how much can a person take abuse and take abuse and take abuse? Like, you know what I mean? And people will say, oh, well, she snapped and stuff. And I'm like, actually, considering anger management, like, for somebody to actually take the amount of abuse that she took for as long as she took, like, I actually don't think most people would be able to actually tolerate the level of abuse she tolerated for as long as she did. Like, I would say she has an above average ability to tolerate abuse, which again got to a threshold, right? Like, I don't think the threshold is a voluntary choice if somebody's continually put in an abuse situation. Like, I think there's just, you know, things that happen that will where it's involuntary, right? And I know there's kind of debates about dissociation being voluntary and involuntary, and you know, I've had even survivors argue with me on their view of, like, they feel like they voluntarily dissociate sometimes, and I'm like, well, I think it's a combination of both. Like, I think there's involuntary dissociation, and then I think some people can learn it as a way to do it voluntarily, but I don't. It's like, yeah, so this is kind of a never ending debate about, you know, if people have agency. But yeah, the shame is, to, like, for me, I think shame is the major barrier to people coming forward. And it's not just their own shame they have to get past, it really is the societal shame. You know, like, some people, even like when they're dating or something, like, people will say, oh, I'm not attracted because, like, if you told somebody about like your sexual abuse history, like, I've had people say, like, the person I was dating said they weren't attracted to me anymore because I had disclosed that I had been abused to them. And it's like, that might not even be the person's fault, you know what I mean? But it's like, there's so many aspects to it that I think people that you know, haven't been through it or haven't worked in the field, like, don't consider all these ways that shame just keeps coming around, and it's just like almost like a hall of shame mirrors that, like, no matter which way a person's trying to healing, that somebody's trying to like hold a shame mirror back up to them, you know?
Yes. A really sad example of this, almost a year ago, actually, one of my dear friends and one of my podcast guests on here, his name was Kevin Sutherland from the UK. He took his life almost a year ago. And in his final disclosure that he posted online before he took his life, one of the first things that he said in his, kind of farewell, his little farewell message to everybody was how he felt he could never be with somebody ever, and that he's so young and he'd never be able to be loved because he's contaminated. And it just like broke my heart so bad. And that it's like, that literally is how they feel because of what other people did to them. That person gets to go walk away, and abusers aren't constantly always, thinking about their victims, but the victims, even if the abuser eventually is like, oh, well, I forget about that kid. That was just one of many kids that I had. That kid carries those feelings of disgust, of having their agency taken away, their free will, of being violated in such a heinous way before most of the times they even have, the words to even put to what's going on. They carry that feeling of contamination and of disgust for the rest of their lives. It takes so much. That's like one of the biggest things, is to figure out what solution can I use to scrub this off, this like bacteria that's just covering my soul and my body, that I feel somebody else will never love me for. Even it's like this invisible filth that people feel. You can't see it on anybody whenever you walk by them. But, I constantly wonder, after reading his message, like, how many people do I walk by every day that just feel like they're wearing an invisible skin of filth and of disgust and contamination, and feel just so horrible being out where they are and have to like fight that every single day, feeling that they're not worthy of being loved or being around people because what somebody else did to them and what they took from them. And it's such an epidemic in our community. But like you said, on some levels, we all deal with it, but especially in the ritual abuse community, if somebody's already wearing that skin whenever they finally decide to come out, and that's how they're treated, well, are you sure that happened? Or you're crazy? Or, oh, I don't want to be with you after you went through that. That's disgusting. I can't believe, you wouldn't have told me that on our first date. I would have never dated you. Those things that we say and how we treat people who are wearing that before helping them scrub that off. It's a crime in itself, what we're doing to them.
Yeah, and it's like, again, it's projecting that agency. Like, if somebody has a even, and it doesn't even have to be like sexual abuse, it's just a symptom of any abuse. Like someone saying, oh, you have anger issues, or you know what I mean? It's like a person didn't choose to be abused when they're a child. And if they're struggling with something when they're older, it's not something wrong with them that they didn't just like absorb the abuse without consequence. Like, it's like they are the ones having to deal with that anger or deal with whatever it is is the symptom. And I'm so glad you used the word contaminated. That is such a good word. And there's a really good book by Patricia Bard Clark, and she wrote quite a few books about satanic ritual abuse from a Christian perspective. And so her one book is called Sanctification in Reverse. And so, the concept of sanctification is like basically things coming up for healing and clearing in order to like purify you and get you closer to God. So like every trauma, everything you repent for, everything you ask for forgiveness, like you're actually just becoming more and more, letting go of things, right? And so the book that she wrote is called I think it's called Satanic Ritual Abuse Sanctification in Reverse. And so if you actually look what ritual abuse is, it's contamination is the opposite of sanctification. And so they're basically trying to attach the shame to you at each level. Like I said, this is even like in the womb, like they're already, using this shame and embedding the shame in people. And, it can even be like over little things. I've had people tell me like, they would be taken to the dentist and they had a cavity and they would be punished for it. Like as if a child like chose to have a cavity, like, you know what I mean? Like all kids get cavities and it's the parents who give them the food. So like you can't get like angry at a kid. And so, yeah, it's this kind of stuff of like getting angry at kids. And then, it like what you just described, people coming forward, feeling contaminated, and then people just like shaming them for whatever is, something that actually like was 100% not in their control. You know what I mean? Like, it's really just something we all need to work on, like holding space for people in a, a shame-free like zone, because, it's people already have their own shame. So like they don't need more shame laid on them in order to, it's not going to help anybody to, shame them more for something they're already ashamed of. Right. And so it's really like, the word contamination is just so perfect. And this is done very, very specifically in ritual abuse. Like they literally want to try and contaminate your spirit at every single step, at every single developmental stage. Like, and then, you know, that the shame really is what, like, I call it that key that holds a person. And it's really like the chain that it, you know, holds the person there. And like on the tarot cards, the devil card, like the chains aren't locked, right? And it's like it's but the shame is like what makes people not even realize that those shackles aren't locked, right? It's the shame is actually the key to the shackles, but you don't even need it. It's like they're already unlocked. You just think that it's locked because of the shame there, right? So I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, like the shame is, you know, what really holds people from even asking for help. They don't feel worthy. It interferes with their self-worth. Like they won't even think that it's like something they should have. Even if it was offered to them, they actually will like block themselves from receiving it because of how deep it goes.
Let me ask you this. So obviously when we're talking ritual abuse, you and I have listened to countless testimonies. You yourself are constantly reading books and just devouring information on the topic. And one of the biggest things that people say who absorb these stories in a really positive way are just wondering, like, what was it with this survivor that of all the people in their family, what makes this one person finally come and walk away from it and not align with it? Do you think that element could possibly be shame, that it's something that was never fully dissociated somehow in their soul and in their heart? They felt they always had some type of a connection to that, to where when they finally realized what was going on, regained memories even, or even, you know, being younger and just sort of knowing something was wrong or rebelling. You hear that so many times in stories. They didn't even know about their abuse, but they're constantly like rebelling against it. Do you think there's some connection to shame and these survivors that we hear coming forward on podcasts like this one?
I don't know, Emma. That's a really good question. And it's like a question that I always have on my mind that I don't think I've really found the answer to. And I wish I did know the answer, because there is something. This is why survivors are so special. Like the ones that are coming forward and like that it didn't work on them, and that they did resist it, and that they chose love, and they chose what's right, and they chose the truth. Like it's actually the most amazing thing ever. And I don't fully know why they're the ones. I think it's part of who their soul is, but then I think there's also just historical factors in place. Like um, I feel like one of the main reasons that ritual abuse is being exposed right now is because they've lost control of isolation. And so shame makes people isolate and makes people not reach out to others, not ask for help, like internalize everything, isolate, you know what I mean? And I think with the internet and with all the people that have chosen, it's kind of like maybe like the 100 monkeys or something, where there's so many people that are coming forward and telling their story, and there's just so much actual corroboration available if people search for it, that I think that it has a big, you know, impact on why more and more people are coming forward. And again, it goes back retroactively too. So even the people that are coming forward now are like, there's older people that didn't come forward back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Like, I mean, like we talked about on our other show, the McMartin kids are still alive, a lot of them and stuff. And a lot of these people that have been through programs have been alive. And whether they've gotten memories back or not, like the people healing now and that chose the truth and chose to come forward despite the consequences, like it's retroactively going back, and it's also going into the future, like by all the things that are being documented and recorded now for like maybe people that are 5 or 6 years old right now that are completely under my control. Like maybe when they're 13 or 14, they're gonna find this information, or you know what I mean? So it actually goes across time, all the people that choose to heal like on a quantum level. And so I think it's affecting the whole that way. But as for like the individual person, why it's them, I mean, I don't know I don't know what the answer is. I don't know. I mean, whatever it is, it's like, I want to harness it and make sure everybody's in touch with it, because it is actually the most amazing thing. And I always talk about, you know, this is when I first started researching ritual abuse, I knew it was the most important thing, because I think it explains all the other problems. I think everything else is a symptom of this. And this is actually where like the plane of cause is and where it's being programmed in, and then we see the effects of it. And a lot of people trying to help in the world are like fighting the effects of this, but it's like, unless you understand that like the war is actually being fought on the subliminal level, like below the conscious level of the people doing it, then, you know, I knew it was really, really important. And I've had to take in a lot of dark material that can almost make a person feel hopeless with the level of evil. But then you're also coming in touch with like these really special, really amazing humans that you're like, wow, like I can't believe a human being had everything taken from them, like everything against them to be destroyed, and they come out these like intelligent, like empathic, righteous, like love, like it's that is actually what's so amazing about all of this, right? So it's like that's what we can really learn from these people. It's not just learning about the darkness of the abusers, it's the fact that it didn't work on some people is what's really so amazing.
I completely agree. That's why, you know, when people ask me like, how do you do this? Like, it's so dark. It's like, yeah, it is. But like, it's just as light as it's dark. You just see the most bright lights in the whole world. Like you see the complete opposite of darkness whenever you get to the end of these stories and you hear that point of overcoming, of getting away, of defeating shame, you know, to the point where you can go on a podcast and talk or read a book. I mean, every single little thing, like these kids, most of them had zero, not a single person or maybe one person in their entire life that like demonstrated something good, maybe a teacher or a friend, like they saw or experienced love for a moment or kindness. But most of these children are coming from just absolute, you know, degradation at home, where every single family member, every friend that's put in their life, every single relationship is toxic, and it's built on these foundations that you were talking about today. And so they didn't grow up with all these examples of like, oh, well, my two parents fight all the time, and like, that's really hard. But I go over to my friend's house and I go over to all my friends' houses, or I go to school. I'm always around all these loving people. So like, I know I'll end up being okay one day. I can recognize what's happening, and I'm seeing healthy relationships. You know, most of these children don't experience that at all. It's down to the point where when they finally do come out and are able to heal, they get in an intimate relationship, and like somebody being nice to them is like so foreign that it's almost hard for them to like be in a relationship, because it's like, whoa, somebody can be nice to me in a relationship, or like love me in a relationship, or like not fight with me over like these stupid things or make me feel bad. And so it's absolutely incredible seeing what the human spirit can endure, survive, and then on the other hand, overcome and heal from. And there really is like something, I totally agree with you. I wish that I could figure out what that was and harness it. I get asked it all the time. And I too, I'm constantly thinking of that. Like, how did all these generations go by and nobody else did what you did? And all of a sudden, 50 years later, 100 years later, 2 generations or 3 generations later, here you are rebelling against it during your childhood. And then eventually, like, against all odds, you leave it, even though it means you leave your whole family behind, you leave your whole background behind, you leave all your resources, your friends, everything, and you're okay with it, because the truth and defeating that shame and healing and finding healthy things in your life, healthy relationships and environments, is more important than all those things that you were bound to ever since you were born. It's just like, it's mind boggling, especially when I look in like my own little life, like relationships that I stayed too long in, you know, and like these little things that I did that like I beat myself up for so long. And I'm just like, I know that there's of course levels to trauma, but there's, you know, trauma's trauma. We don't know things that we haven't gone through. So what we go through is hard, you know, but it's just amazing when I look at my life and I'm like, gosh, like I thought what I had to overcome was so hard sometimes. And it was for me, you know, but thinking about the level of what these people overcome, it's like, gosh, it's a freaking bloody miracle that anybody makes it out, seeing all the different boundaries and the strongholds that they have on each person to stay.
Yeah. And, you know, it's like, I think they generate it out of themselves. Like, I think some of them didn't even have, I mean, I think it's huge if they did have one person. I think that can be like the tipping point for, I think there's a lot of stories like that where they met one good person and that made all the difference. But there's also stories where there was no other person, and that person just literally generated it out of themselves. And I don't know if it's because they just even had a level of intelligence to just even if they were like so wounded emotionally, they just couldn't actually believe the BS being programmed in it. Like they just were too smart to like go along with it. Like, you know what I mean? Like even with all the trauma, they just still like knew it was all an illusion, you know? And shame is an illusion. Like it's it's just like I said, it's like those fake chains, you know what I mean? It's like it's shame. Once people identify with shame, it's like this imaginary thing. It's this imaginary prison of shame that people are in that just stops them from doing so much. And sometimes when people try to come out of shame, there's something I want to mention called like a shame flashback. And so people have, you know, like abreactions or flashbacks of, you know, trauma and like intense, you know, physiological experiences of trauma. But like there's also something called an emotional flashback, which is something really I think everybody should be familiar with. And there's a really good book that I forgot to bring out today by a counselor named Pete Walker. And I think his book was called Complex PTSD. And then he wrote another book called The Tao of Something. Anyways, his books are like really easy to read. Like anybody can pick them up, and it's just like a really basic outline of trauma and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And but he kind of coined the term emotional flashback, and it's something really key that people don't really realize they can be having it all the time. And I know that some survivors talk about things like flooding and stuff like that, and like that's what it really is like a programmed emotional flashback. And so a lot of times people can have shame triggers that are actually subconscious. And so, you know, this is where the self-sabotage comes in and like all these kind of shame-driven behaviors, you know what I mean? Because people will actually, sometimes people will just be like driving in their car and feel like flooded with shame. You know what I mean? It's like, that is an emotional flashback. And so the shame's kind of like always like a button that can be pressed on people. And even some of the people that, you know, so like shame's used to blackmail people too. And so, you know, a lot of like why stuff's not being disclosed right now is because there's a bunch of people that have been involved in stuff that are too ashamed to actually come forward. And whether that's intentional or not, whether they were set up and drugged and blackmailed or not, you know, the shame of, you know, especially because pedophilia is one of the last taboos in our society, which is actually being eroded as a taboo, but like it kind of grows across cultures. Like nobody's gonna like openly accept a pedophile. Like we're not at that point, even though they would like to program that in. Like anybody that has pedophilic blackmail on them, like that is the strongest blackmail they have, because they know that like there's no way that's going to come out and just be okay. So you know, that's another reason why they intentionally make people complicit in abuse or have forced perpetration is, you know, shame also being used for political means as well, to keep people that you know, could help expose this, but you know, they're also ashamed for their families and stuff to come forward.
You're so right. I think that that's probably the biggest way that they were able to evolve childhood shame for adults. You know, children are shameless in a lot of ways when it comes to being embarrassed. They're not quite as in tune with that, except you see a lot of children, and you know, these stories are, because they're made to be hyper aware of these really mature things like humiliation and embarrassment, and you know, they're taught that very young to feel those things. But, you know, that's something that could be a little bit easier to shake off. The same methods that were used to humiliate or to make somebody feel shame as a child, it's a lot easier to do that than it is to an adult. An adult can shake off a lot of the things that might have, you know, made them feel bad as a kid and be like, okay, you told me that whenever I was a kid, like, I don't care. But if you're holding blackmail over somebody's head and they have to think about, what will my wife think? Oh my God, I have a job. I have this, like I have a reputation in my community. And like you said, if this comes out, there's no going back. You know, you can see how that can make somebody recoil into cowardice and, you know, just back into shame in a way, you know. And a lot of times whenever I try to think about that, you know, that would be a really hard thing to contend with. It's a huge barrier to overcome that. And it's something a lot of survivors, you know, every survivor really has to step over that barrier and be like, you know what, like my family has videos on me and they can release them at any time and they could be really damning to me, but I'm going to come forward and do this anyways. And they can go ahead and do it if they want, you know. And I think getting over that it takes that power away if you can voice that. If there's a survivor already coming out and sharing about it and saying, yeah, my family has all these videos on me that they threatened to put out. If the family then does it, they're proving that testimony correct. It's no longer like, oh, you're crazy. The person already came out and said the things that shamed them the most, that the thing that's been held over their head is now spoken about and it's put out by them. And so if the family does put it out, yeah, it might not be something good that people want to watch. It might not be something pleasant or something that is going to make us, happy to watch, but we can be like, oh, that's exactly what the person said was going to happen. Like that's a method of how they were shaming them into trying to keep them from talking. So you do see how that is like such a big mechanism used, why it's such a big part of all these child testimonies of these adults now who are speaking out. A lot of them were made to be put in those compromising positions with adults to help film things that could damn them, later on and be used on adults instead of just on children.
Something that just came to mind for me. So it's kind of a catch-22 because people feel shamed when they come out for different reasons, but then they also feel shamed for not coming out. So like, especially because abusers rarely only have one victim, right? And so like when people are abused and they don't tell the truth, they actually hate themselves for not, because they think, oh my gosh, like I'm not stopping this person, I'm not, being brave and courageous and outing my abuser. And so they like have shame over that. And then they have shame thinking of what, like they're responsible for what this abuser might go and do to others. And so maybe that ties into what you said about maybe shame being related to why people choose to like say I'm not going along with this, because there is so much shame in going along with it. Like maybe there's just like a shame dialectic where it's like, is it more shameful going along with this or more shameful not going along with this, where it just, for some people it's different, I guess. Maybe that is one of the drivers that helps them get out of it. But that it's like that internalized shame, like every person who comes forward already had to overcome that, and then if they're shamed when they come out, it's just like, it's so horrifying. You know what I mean? Like I keep saying to people, like, if you don't understand it, just don't comment at all. You know what I mean? Like whether it's people online or if you don't understand it, like, and again, it's hard for survivors because sometimes it's hard when people have been abused to like gauge who's safe. And so survivors do take risks and they get really wounded and then they don't want to take the risks anymore. And it's like really, really hard to know. You don't know how, if somebody's safe to tell your story to until after you've told it to them. And so every time that somebody tells their story, it's taking such a huge risk and they're so vulnerable. And so it's like something I just try to like, people can kind of like try to gauge people a little bit more, or there's like incremental disclosure where like you tell somebody a little bit and see how they react, or say like, are you comfortable? Like, do you want to know the truth? Are you comfortable me telling you this? Like, because sometimes people just need to tell the truth so bad that they're like, I just need to tell everybody. And then they get traumatized from the way people treat them as well. So it's like so hard for survivors of any type of abuse to, and people think they're just disclosing like for their own reasons, but a lot of times it is like caring about others and not wanting to happen to other children and feeling like a moral obligation to tell the truth or come forward or disclose things or expose things. And then for people to shame them when they're doing that is like just that secondary trauma, like that second betrayal trauma. You know what I mean? And this is even with like narcissistic abuse and stuff. Like when people try to come forward and say like something and everybody's like, oh no, I know that person, they're great and stuff, like basing it on nothing to do with whether, except for like that person's nice to them. Like that's not based on having any knowledge or about this person at all. It's just that, oh, well, that person makes me feel good, so I don't want to believe they're an abuser, so I'm going to shame you for even, saying anything, which is really common. It happens online. It happens in families. Like, I mean, it's like, it's just so horrifying, if people really knew the strength it took for anybody to speak about this stuff, especially when they've been programmed, like they actually have internal programs like to go against, like to override in order to tell anybody. I think if people really understood that, like I said, if you can't handle it, like not everybody's trained, not everybody has like sexual abuse first responder training or education on this, like, you know what I mean? Some people are naturally like a good friend or a good listener, you know what I mean? And that can even, you know, like hairdressers, you know, like there's lots of people in the world that are like naturally good listeners, or nice people. You don't have to have like some intense training, but you know, it's really gauging who is safe to tell your story to, because a lot of people just actually aren't capable. They're not capable. Like they're going to give trauma back if you try to use them to be capable of something they're not. And so it's like really trying to gauge that. And it's not easy.
No, and you brought up so many good points about just the way in general, you know, it's not just the friend or the person that they tell or the podcast host. You know, this is happening on a grand scale everywhere. One of the things I wanted to ask you your opinion on, how do you think in the therapeutic setting, knowing how ill trauma informed a lot of, you know, our counselors and therapists and people working with survivors, what are some ways that shame is showing up sort of unwittingly, you know, in these environments that should be safe? And I want this to be more in the context of a therapist who genuinely is trying to do good. It's not a cult member, not somebody who's in there purposely to shame them and somebody put in their path, just somebody who genuinely cares but might not know about these things. What are some ways that we're sort of putting this secondary shame on survivors in these environments?
Yeah, again, it's like anybody that's working with vulnerable people, like you always need to be like working on yourself and working on your own biases and like actually having feedback from other people about like what your barriers to empathy are, because we all have them. And like, I mean, I feel like I'm pretty good now after years and years, but like I've worked places too. And I remember like I had one client once and he was like, he just had these really like the amount of people he said abused him just actually seemed unbelievable to me, and I believed him so much. And this was like, you know, 20 years ago. It was a long time ago. I wasn't like as experienced, but you know, I remember like I believed him so much, but then like the more I got to know him, like there was just more stories of abusers and more stories of abusers, where I actually started to question like if that was even like probable or possible for like just statistically for somebody to be abused that much. And so I started doubting like this, just I just can't believe, it just seems unbelievable that like this person would be a victim. And now like studying victimology and realizing that like, you know, it actually attracts more abuse, like that abuse, you know, that you go through when you're young actually, you know, kind of draws abusers to you in other ways, because you're, you know, like having the effects of your abuse kind of on you, like in your aura even, right? And so like understanding that now, it's actually really common. Like it's really common for people that have been victimized, or like, you know what I mean? Or I've had like I've heard different stories of, you know, ritual abuse survivors that like that's what triggered their first remembering for them was having like a sexual assault incident in adulthood, you know what I mean? And it's like, you know, it's like these abusers can like sense that people have been abused. They can almost sense that shame. And I almost say like abusers actually attach to shame. Like even if it's dating a narcissist or a psychopath or any malignant dark personality, like they actually can like almost like smell shame on people, and they can like go in a room and they can like sense shame, and the shame is like actually their in and like what they attach to. Like they actually attach to like an inner child shame, like whether that's like a, you know, a girl with like low self-esteem, or like, you know, when you look at people that are like recruiting for some of the sex trafficking rings and stuff, like they said you can go to a mall and you can tell which girl has shame, and like you, that's the one you're going to try and come in and meet, and like they can really tell. And so people do get victimized older. And so yeah, like I've been in situations too, and like knowing what I know now, I'm like, no, there's no doubt in my mind that person was telling the truth. But that's just like an example when you're young and inexperienced and you're like, wow, it's just kind of getting hard to believe that like this person had 15 abusers in their life. Like that just seems hard to believe, you know what I mean? And now realizing that there's like groups of organized abusers, it's like, no, that's actually not hard to believe at all. And like even just studying esoteric stuff of how, you know, like energy patterns and stuff attract things, like it's not unbelievable. But yeah, I think the training, I mean, I think the training for like shame, I think there's, you know, like I said, like even the stuff from Brene Brown and stuff, like it's pretty current research. There's been massive research lately. Like I was even catching up on some stuff this week, and I was like, even from a year ago, like there's all these people that have done PhD research and like huge studies and stuff, like giving us new information and actually going back and questioning some of the original stuff that's taught in schools. Like, and so I think it's really cool. I think there's actually a lot of empathic people on the planet right now that are really starting to catch on to these abusers and their personalities and the psychology behind it. And I think that like so much is being exposed that like people are really starting to accept like psychopathy and like really starting to like question why this is happening. And I think there's been another level of denial broken through, and I think that like the school system for training helpers needs to like catch up in what they're actually teaching. But in the research side of it, like there's some really good research that people are doing right now, and because of the tools like the internet and stuff, like they've really been able to do like way bigger studies and like across populations and stuff that they weren't necessarily, and like accessing the research of other people as well. Like I really think that it's just a kind of a time lag before like what they're teaching in schools. But you also have to understand that there's an intentional cover up, right? So like they are the cabals own the universities. Like they are the people that are like making the practicum in a structure that only goes so far, so that there's like they can get people to a certain level, but it's within a box, and they're not going to talk about the stuff just outside of the box. Like I've been studying lately a lot of forensic psychology and like looking at these people, like listening to research from people that have PhDs and stuff in studying in like criminology and forensics and stuff like that. And like none of them are mentioning organized extreme abuse. And I find that so interesting that somebody who has a PhD, and I'm not saying there isn't anybody out there, but like it's still kind of left out. Like they're still trying to study the individual mind of like the psychopath serial killer, or you know what I mean? And there's people that have done work like David McGowan and stuff on Program to Kill, like saying, no, this is MK Ultra. But like, it's really interesting when you see somebody with a PhD in this stuff talking, and like they're not even like, it's not even like on their list of things to include researching is like these organized abuser groups and how they've been embedded in our society for so long. I think that's one area that really should be like, I was actually putting comments on some really great YouTube channels I found being like, have you looked into like extreme organized abuse? Because you're missing like the fact that, this is done deliberately on purpose on an industrial scale in a medicalized setting. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, I think it's catching up slowly. I think that a lot of people are coming online. Like, I think there's some really good, books that have come out on, just psychopathy and abusers and the nature of evil. And like, people are really questioning, why our society is basically like going down the drain. Like, I think there's a lot of people coming online and trying to actually figure this stuff out. So I think it's just a matter of time for it to catch up, but you really have to understand that there's stuff deliberately held back for an agenda.
That is such a good point that you make about the focus on individuals versus groups, because I think if society had that understanding, it would push the narratives that survivors tell. It would help break the barrier for it. Because if you look at what's focused on in the news, for example, I mean, let's just look at Epstein. Everybody can relate to that case and hear about it, So we have this alleged horrific abuser who has abused countless, young girls and, whoever else, women, and yet he and his recruiter were sort of the only accomplices. We have there's nobody else in this network, but they somehow accessed all these young girls and kept them quiet and used them for all these things just by themselves. They sort of do that. I've noticed that in the news. They throw out these lone wolves or these little groups, these little small groups that seem kind of not related in any way. They're coworkers or they're people that work for this company, but usually it's the lone wolf. You hear about one pedophile or one abuser who got arrested, and all of a sudden the case is solved. You can go, we fixed it. Don't worry about it. No more kids are going to be hurt. We have this guy. And so I think people, and then in movies, there's not a lot of portrayal of group abuse. It's usually these lone people, like in the movie Taken. He obviously, the main character in that movie, had a couple other people that knew about what he was doing, but really he was the main character. He was the one perpetuating. the situation onto his victim. And so you see how that leaks into our belief in what abuse is, and how we almost can't comprehend that there could be groups of adults that literally sit around and plan how to continually abuse multiple children, pass them around, that all these different people have roles, that they're going to set up satanic rituals. They're going to set up these really elaborate kind of stage plays to traumatize children, that there's actually people sitting around that do these things as adults. It can be so far out of our mind that that can happen, that it's easier, I think, to relate to the lone wolf and to think, oh, well, of course nobody else. Like, why would somebody want to be around that person doing that? Of course that person would be isolated and doing that by himself. How would he meet other people who would want to do that? There's not many people in the world that would want to do something like that. Well, not only is there, but birds of a feather flock together. And you see that all the time. If you listen to these testimonies, you hear about how it's usually not just one church pastor, it's the whole church. It's not just one Freemason, it's all of them at the top of their organization. These people get together and they organize the abuse. It's very rare actually that you hear about just these kind of lone wolf situations, unless it's kind of a domestic abuse situation where somebody is let in the house, a stepfather, or somebody's kind of like let in the family, a nanny, a babysitter, a teacher. So you do hear about that, but we're not taught about that. We're taught that this type of abuse happens with one person usually. And if people understood and had more access to examples of the organizational side and adults that literally work together to do this, it would shatter everything. I think that that's very deliberately kept from society and from the public eye, because that belief system shatters the survivor testimonies that say, no, my whole family was in on it. Oh, really? Your whole family was in on it? All these adults are just conspiring against you, the little kid. It can just be so far out of our mind because it's not what we're exposed to. We're always sort of just taught that there's these lone wolves and it's okay, we took care of it. We arrested him, they're in jail. You don't need to worry anymore. And then we're like, whoo, not knowing that he's just one of an entire network of people.
Yeah, like when I watch the Larry Nassar and stuff, I'm like, no, this is like obviously like a very specific, deliberate betrayal trauma that they're doing specifically on, and they use a lot of athlete psychology. Like there's a lot of MK Ultra in athletics. Like it's really, really connected, right? And again, it goes back to that national security thing. Like I don't think people understand that like the government actually uses this technology for military national security purposes. It's not there's kind of this illusion of like psychiatry and psychology and counseling and all these things are the good guys, and but it's not. These are the people actually creating this stuff are psychologists, psychiatrists, people working in these specific fields. Like this is the false memory society foundation. Like these are the people. Like MK Ultra is based on psychiatry, on psychology, on medical. It's doctors, it's people that understand neuroscience, like, you know what I mean? And so there's kind of this outer veneer of, oh, this stuff's all created to help you. And so it's all, these are all really good people. And I'm not trying to cut down the field, although I actually really like the stuff they're teaching now is really bad. A lot of it, like really normalizing evil and dysfunction. And it's, you know what I mean? But there's always good people in there. So like, I don't like to make blanket statements because, a person can be a good doctor or a bad doctor, even though we know what's going on with the medical system. Like it's not necessarily the system. It's like, it can attract really horrible people into it. And these fields actually do attract really bad people. I'm sorry, but you're working with vulnerable populations. And I've worked places like I've seen really narcissistic, psychopathic, communal narcissists, like cold-hearted, callous, like people who, this is the kind of place where people like to embed themselves to have the veneer to cover up their evil. Like if you look at cult members and stuff, like they want to have that veneer of being a good member of society and stuff, and like working with the homeless or something is like the perfect way to do that, right? Where it can just be a money laundering organization, like, you know what I mean? So it's just like getting people to get past the black and white thinking. But again, I don't want to like defer anybody from going and seeking help, but it's like I liken it to like online dating. Like you can't just like look at somebody's profile and be like, oh look, they're handsome and they have this and that. Like it's like, yeah, that's going to be a lot of counselors profiles. When you look up their webpage, you're going to be like, oh, this person like has it together and they're great and they have this education and they're and so people, again, this comes back to survivors being really traumatized because they go and like invest and are vulnerable and think maybe if I, I'm vulnerable and expose my shame to this person, they can help me. And if something happens and that is really, really damaging, right? And so that person's going to not want to go for help again. And it's hard because there probably is a really good counselor for somebody out there, but it's like the same as online dating. Like you're going to have to go through these kind of stages of sussing people out and maybe trying them a little bit incrementally. Like if I tell them something kind of small, how do they react? You know what I mean? And also realizing like one person isn't going to be the be all end all savior for people, where it's like, oh, because you read these books, right, where they're like, oh, I found this one therapist and then we wrote a book together and it was like, that was all. And yeah, I'm sure that's happened, but like that's probably not going to happen for everybody. And sometimes you have to go to multiple places because no counselor is perfect, but like most of them are good at something, right? And so like you want to get what's good that person's good at, and maybe that's all you're going to get. Maybe you're going to do so much with that person and you're going to learn something from them, and then that's all it's going to be. And then maybe you need to go in a group with somebody else, and then maybe that group starts to turn weird and you're like, I've gotten what I'm going to get out of this. And like, you know what I mean? It's like kind of not putting all your eggs in one basket, because again, that can make somebody really vulnerable to being shamed again, because or feeling like a failure or feeling rejected, when it's kind of like you need to just take the bits and pieces. And like there's so much available online now for people to learn themselves. Like I mean, oh my gosh, there's so many university lectures online, like little counseling sessions, groups online. Like there's just so many resources available for free for people, right? But like again, the shame and abuse happens in relationship, and like healing happens in relationship, right? And so it doesn't matter what technique you're using. It's the therapeutic relationship is actually connecting to another human being who has that positive unconditional regard, who sees me as a worthy person, who believes me, who's willing to hold space, who's willing to not judge. Like that is like what people need the most, right? Is just some other human. Because again, it goes back to that little baby who was like the velveteen rabbit that wasn't real because it wasn't loved. And so if you can find somebody that can sit with you and say like, I believe you, you're worth it, I don't think there's anything wrong with you, like that is going to be really, really powerful. And but it's not the be all end all either. Like there's so much to do. And again, this is another thing that gets shamed on survivors, is like people it's like shamed for not healing. Like it's like, oh, you should have like just got some counseling and been fine now. And it's like, no, it doesn't cure. Like the things that have happened to these people are like non-human. You know what I mean? It's so bad what's happened, and they are such a miracle just for being alive. And for the fact that they're not harming others on top of being alive is like such a miracle. Like that is more that could be expected from the thousands of people in the same place as them that were probably killed by going through, like they actually made it through that. Like so many people don't make it through. So these people are already a miracle, and then they get like shamed for, like not, like all they have to do is go to some counseling, and then all of a sudden they should be fine and they should be functioning and they shouldn't have any trauma. And, it's like, I'd like to see somebody else do that. You know what I mean? Like,
one of the points that you brought up that I just wanted to reiterate, because that's another common thing in ritual abuse, is sort of the fact of the dual personalities that a person can live. It's hard for people to believe that a CEO at a business or a pharmacist or a doctor or a psychologist or somebody who went to school for 10 years to get a degree could then go participate at night in such heinous things like what you hear about in these testimonies, and I think that that's another way that, like you said, we shame people for that. The community has this, that the child grew up with, has this facade of what they think of their abuser. And because the child also didn't disclose, then whenever they become an adult, they're like, we saw you smiling with your dad all the time or with this person, and he was an outstanding member of our community. there's no way that this person could have participated in what you're saying, and you wouldn't have been smiling and you wouldn't have been going along with it if you were being treated that way. We would have noticed, we would have seen it in him. And it's like, no, that's not how abuse works either. Like, it's so covert, but it's also just right under our noses. And it's just so bizarre how once you see it everywhere, like you said, with some of these scandals that you see on TV. If you know this information and if you've listened to testimonies, you can see through the lines and be like, that's not a Lone Ranger there that we're seeing, that gymnastics coach was working. There's a whole network working with him to help facilitate that and to have covered it up for so long. But because we can't believe that a network could do something like that, and also because it's so hard to believe that a gymnastics coach or somebody, like I was saying, that's kind of an outstanding member in society, could then go be so dark, have such a dark side to them. The lack of understanding that we have of this and why it stays hidden for so long is just really mind-boggling, especially when you wake up to it and you learn. And it's like, holy crap, like I see this everywhere now that I know it exists. It's all around us all the time. We just don't know what we're seeing because we're not taught it.
Yeah, it's another thing that shame does is like it's so like all our culture is a cult. And so like shame is such a barrier to people changing their behavior as well, because the more they've gone into shame-based behaviors, the harder it is to come out. And like a really good example of that is like porn addiction and stuff. Like it's like the worse it gets, the worse it gets. And like, and there's even psychology, like for people, like so like the more people go into something, the harder it is for them to admit they were wrong, and they'll actually cling to the lies more than saying I was wrong and redirecting their behavior. And so we see this with like people that are in abusive relationships with narcissists, or people that have invested a lot into something, and then it's too like, because they've already invested so much, it's hard for them to redirect back because they feel ashamed for being stupid and wrong. And it's a really dangerous psychology that we're all vulnerable to, but it's like really important to understand, because you can end up in a really bad spot. It's better to cut your loss and like redirect, because if you get stuck in that psychology, it can be really bad. And so this kind of happens with cults too. And so you see like how hard it is for people to admit that this is going on in our society, because they have to give up so much, like believing in their church leaders, believing in the mental health field, believing in doctors, believing in politicians, like believing in like the goodness of mankind, and like all these things that people want to believe to be true in order to like have a framework of reality to live in. So like that's why I think it's so important what we're doing to just keep blasting out the information, like, because it's helping to break through those shame-based barriers. Because in hindsight, if people look back, there's always indicators of the abuse, but they just didn't want to see them. And that's kind of happening globally, where people just don't want to admit that like these people that we think are good people or upstanding citizens are capable of this evil, because then we feel fooled and duped, and we don't want to believe that. Like, so this is something I've really, really learned. And like the way that people normally get into bad situations is, and I speak from personal experience, is like believing what you want to be true. Like humans are so inclined to believe what they want to be true. And so we don't want to believe this stuff is happening. We don't want to believe people are capable of this evil. We don't want to believe this is part of humanity. And so anything that's offered to people to negate this, people are more likely to say, oh, I like that and I want it to be true, so I'm going to believe that. And so that's why we need to keep just blasting with the testimonies and saying it over and over until it's undeniable and it breaks through, because people just, it's so hard for people to accept this reality, but that's exactly what keeps it going. And that's why we need to just keep blowing the horn, literally, just like, saying this is happening, this is real, this is happening, this is real. And eventually it's going to break through. And it actually already has. Like, I think it already has been heard by so many people, and I think more people are coming online. I think more people, like I said, there's been like amazing research, and people are actually starting to look into this, and it has gotten into the vernacular. And like that, even though most people haven't really gotten to like the real reality of it, at least they're kind of looking at the surface now, whether it is just like, Epstein or Larry Nassar, like this kind of stuff. This is still surface level, you know what I mean? Unfortunately. of how dark this stuff actually goes. And so, I'm sorry, I don't know if that really answered your question. Oh yeah, but so like the shame, this again is another shame-based behavior for people going into denial and not wanting to believe this, because shame prevents people from saying I was wrong, and it prevents people from saying I'm sorry. And so this is like, the shame, it's like almost like every single player in this has shame as a pylon around them, even though it's a little bit different, like blackmail shame, shame of not wanting to know this is true, shame of people even being complicit, like maybe helping an abuser and maybe they don't want to admit that. So it's just easier for them to pretend they didn't know. You know what I mean? Like, and so shame is really driving kind of all of this from the vaccines.
Yes, you're so right about that. And it is a topic that, even though we're talking about it in regards to ritual abuse, it's something that every single person has been exposed to in some way, to where they're carrying it in one way or another, and it's a really important topic just for that matter. It's something that affects us all. It's something that is a burden. It's something that if we don't talk about it, and if we don't address it and don't speak over it and sort of take our power back from it, you see how debilitating it can be. Like you said, there's survivors that some of them don't wake up till later in life, but some of them do. Some of them wake up, in their mid-30s, and they stay quiet until they're 70. What a shit, no pun intended, but what a shame that they're carrying that for so long because of these reasons that we're talking about, because they're too afraid to tell somebody, thinking that they'll be shamed, because they have all these belief systems that they were programmed to have, that they're not worthy and that they're not deserving of being believed, but also, being heard and being seen and being accepted. They have all these negative belief systems that were instilled in them, and it's just, it's so sad how deep this goes, and the ways that one or a million instances in childhood can affect an adult and can make them a completely different person than who they were meant to be, and continue taking from them, even though the abuser might have passed away or they might not have seen them in decades and decades. The abuse from that person continues and continues and continues and continues until their shame is able to release from their body, until they find somebody that can help scrub off that contamination that they feel. And it's really sad that how far we've come from that. There's a series that I've been airing on my podcast from almost 30 years ago. And I'm just like, how did they have such a grip on these individuals? And like, we haven't even evolved from it. We've almost like degressed over that time. And we're just kind of now starting to like pick it up again and look at it and like kind of start there and like be able to take those pieces and move forward. But it's like, man, just all the different generations that just kind of let this continue going and just stopped looking at it, and all the people that have, lived and even died carrying their stories without ever feeling in a safe enough place and without ever being able to get rid of their shame to tell. It's just so sad to think about it. And it's so sad it's wonderful to hear these survivors later on in life coming forward, but it's just heartbreaking how long so many of them have just kept that inside and like never felt that shame lift enough to where they could finally talk about it to somebody until they're way, way, way on in life,
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that series. I've been enjoying it so much, and I was really surprised I never found it, but maybe it was because it was not I don't know how, like I've been listening to all of those and I'm like, wow, what a hidden gem in history. Because it almost does seem like they were more aware of it then than some of the people in the field talking now, because there's clinical people in there and researchers, and like, a lot of the testimonies, like the one of Valerie Wolf and Kathleen Sullivan and stuff, like they were really talking about like naming psychologists, psychiatrists, like facilities, like, like I've been actually taking those and sending them to some of the survivors I know that are in their 60s now, and saying like, especially because some of them were Canadian, and I was like, oh, like look at this hidden gem, like, this is what I mean about it going forward in time, because those were time stamped then, and I'm using it now and sending it to somebody in their 60s and saying like, do you recognize any of these doctors' names or these facilities, or like, because here's somebody else that's also in their 60s now, even though this is from the 90s. Those are amazing. Like I've been listening to all of those and just learning so much. But yeah, they're really, if you look at it, it's really like kind of a core group of people that was developing this technology. And, it's like they definitely were, these are people that would be seen as like highly revered, top of their field, like clinical experts, you know what I mean? Like, it's like they've used this knowledge for evil. And, it did get exposed. There's kind of like little, it's almost like a pulsing exposure, right? Where like it comes out a little bit and then it gets covered up, and then it comes out a little bit more and it gets covered up. And, like we've done shows before about the satanic panic and stuff, but like listening to those, whatever they were called, the CKL, I don't know what they're called.
Yeah, CKLN mind control radio
CKLN, the CKLN mind control series that anybody that wants to listen to, they're all on Emma's page, and they're really, really worth listening to for anybody researching this. But yeah, I just couldn't believe that those came out back then. And, it's like, why aren't these like lectures being shown in universities for social work and counseling students? Like, it's just it's just like, these are actual, PhD people telling their research, and like people coming forward saying they were actually in like military medical programs, government programs. Like, these are not just like random, dude with dark glasses in a van at the park. Like, it's like these people were telling you like this is organized. But I think a lot of it still has to do with national security, and that's why even the Epstein stuff now, it's like, I mean, it is connected to national security. I don't know that most of humanity doesn't understand that actually satanic ritual abuse is legal. I don't know if people actually can handle that. Like, it actually is under a set of laws where it's considered making assets for the government for national security, and that they're using it to create people to work for their programs that don't have human rights because, well, they have human rights, but they don't have government rights because of the National Security Act. And I think that's like one of the key things that people need to wrap their head around, is that these people have immunity. They have immunity to go and do this. They have immunity to use torture, sexual abuse, and program children in our so-called civilized countries, Canada and the United States. And they're actually above the law of the land. They're not above God's law or actual human rights, but they actually are not being held accountable for this because they're doing it in such a way where they're not legally liable. This is considered medical, military research and programs. And that's why it's still happening. And that's why, even though it's being exposed and people can think that people are going to stop it, they're actually not. This is technology that's been used for military and medical purposes.
In your research, do you think that there's a way that we can reverse the National Security Act? Is there a way to dismantle it? What would it take to abolish that? Because that seems like another linchpin in the whole of this big picture of getting full exposure. That's always like the umbrella over disclosure is national security.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Like, I know Juliet Engel was talking about the release, of the MK Ultra files, and I haven't had a chance to go through all of it. I think it's 1,200 pages or something. But yeah, they do release certain amounts of stuff, but like, I don't think people really understand that, like, they have actual immunity. And I don't know, Emma. I'm not. I don't know what would legally have to happen. Actually, that's like a really good question. Is what would actually need to happen for that to legally be repealed? But again, the people in control of that are complicit and involved. So they're like, I don't know what it would take to actually change that law. But I mean, that's maybe something that the viewers and anybody who cares can start researching and thinking about how that can be changed. Because yeah, until that's changed, they don't have to disclose, like, the stuff that Bill Gates, like where he said sorry and they paid people out, and and in Canada they had hearings and paid people out for some of the torture experiments of Ewan Cameron at McGill University and stuff. Like, they have actually paid compensation, but it was more of a hush compensation than actually saying like, oh, this is horrible, it's been exposed and we're going to stop doing it. It was like, oh, this is leaking out a little bit, we're going to like admit to what we have to and pay off a couple people and get them to sign non-disclosure agreements, and like, basically keep doing this and just moving it around to different facilities. Like, you know what I mean? And now, they also, because of the way that things are changing globally with like, international law and stuff, and like a lot of weird stuff happens like out at sea on ships, like actual unethical research. A lot of unethical research actually happens to people that are dissociative, that don't even know they're part of medical trials. As fantastic as that sounds, it's outlined really well in some of Spally's later books. It's like there's kind of these legal loopholes, and one place I always mentioned was some of these places in Canada where they have joint national research councils, which they do military training on, but they're not actually a military base. Like, they're research councils, and then they bring soldiers from different countries onto the different land, and then on a different base that has a different jurisdiction. And so it's another way for them to kind of weasel around actual like rights that come from being a citizen on a geographical area of a country. And so it's like really snaky the way they do all of it. And so I don't know, Emma, that's a really good question that I'll just throw it to the audience. Like, what actually would need to change to get that act repealed? I don't know. Kathy O'Brien would probably be a good person. Like, she's pretty smart about this stuff to know what would actually need to change. But, until that changes, I don't, like, people are wondering why arrests and stuff hasn't happened. And it's like, because they actually have immunity. Like, they're not even subject to the court system. They will say you can't investigate because it's like, it's for national security. Like, that is just like a blanket statement that it's like, no, you can't even look into this because it would put national security at risk if you even looked into it. So therefore you can't even look into it. And the MK Ultra program has been under this umbrella like since just after 1947. They've been actually allowed to do this.
And I mean, just on a micro scale, you can listen to these testimonies of these mothers who lost their kids in family court, and you see that the perpetrators have immunity of their crimes and get favored and even get custody of children that they're being accused of abusing. So you see how our court systems are not immune to the corruption that we see in the government, that the network can be, that we're discussing, can be in one person's life with family members and people around them, but the government's network extends everywhere it can, and there's so many different ways that these crimes stay hidden. It's really terrifying to think of it, because it's like, man, I ask myself that all the time, like, what's going to be the thing that pushes this over the edge, that gets it exposed, like, what is it going to take? Because they do have so many strongholds on everything. It's like, no matter what we do, there's like a limit to where they allow us to go, but I think like the strength in numbers is really like where we get our power, because they never anticipated us organizing, growing a network the same way that they have, and using it for good. They've always, like you said, they've used shame and these different abuse methods to keep these individual survivors and people who have went through this isolated and away from getting help, away from being able to function normally in society, or even sometimes have a home, so the fact that that's changing now, because like you said, with the internet, different ways to connect, it's a lot easier now to find resources to heal. There's still so many hurdles that we have to do, but there's just more ways now that survivors are able to sort of navigate the path to disclosure that we didn't have back in the day when Kathy O'Brien started disclosing, which it's just amazing that what that woman has done, the fact that she was able to do what she did back then so courageously, it's just amazing. But, I think that that's kind of where the power is going to come, is us all coming together and sort of creating a demand that the government can't fight anymore. And you were mentioning all the different little breadcrumbs that they leave, the amounts of documents that they leak out. So it's sort of like satisfies people's needs for a little bit, and they're like, oh, okay, well, look, they did admit it and they're sorry, and they're coming to terms with it. But like, the one thing that's always left out, that people like, another thing that doesn't get talked about, the children are always left out. Everything's always about doing LSD experiments on adults, what that took, who was involved with it. And even though it's horrific to think that that these types of experiments were done on adults, they completely always leave out, there's nothing about organized ritual abuse on children. It all seems like very random experiments. Oh, there was this one guy who came in once and we did this to him, and this was the effect, and then he went home. There's like, the ritualistic organization of it is completely left out. The network is left out. you know? And so again, you see how compartmentalized this information gets, even with what they're telling us. They just give us these breadcrumbs that don't really satisfy anybody's needs. They're almost just like helping people understand that this is real in a way and that it happened, but like it's still a complete narrative control, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really going to be a change in consciousness of numbers, right? And so like that's already happening. And I always say like evil mostly like their power is always from default. It's always just from people not realizing they're even in a war and not picking up their power and using it. Like as soon as they do that, like evil's really always in the weaker position. It's like, so now I think, you know, a lot of people are coming online about this. Like I said, there's still a bit of a time delay, but like, you know, these people, they're really arrogant because they went unquestioned for so long. And, you know, like people are not just going to accept a society of this happening. Like, you know what I mean? Unless every single person on the planet is MK Ultra to the point where they're completely dissociative and we had a complete slave planet of people that were like the entire planet was had dissociative identity disorder. That is like maybe the only way that they could actually have what they want. And like I don't think they're even able to do that because there's always going to be a certain percentage of people that aren't going to stick to the programming. Like they just don't actually have that power. Um, you know, they haven't been doing this on a mass scale for that long. They actually just are so arrogant. They think they've got away with it, but they really don't understand like how many people, like I said, like I was just researching this week and I couldn't believe how many people are actually researching this stuff now and like doing really good like actual research, clinical research, like on psychopathy, on, and I still think there's a gap in organized abuse, but like people are really starting to question like what is going on, what is wrong with the world, like why is society not functioning in a way, you know, back through history there was like at least a veneer of civility where people tried to be like a decent neighbor, and you know what I mean, like it's pretty obvious now that like the social structure is not holding in place at all. And I think all it really is going to take is like for the actual moral people to, first of all, understand what's happening and then care enough to take action. And I think that's already happening. Like I felt really inspired this week just watching like all of these people that are like, wow, I didn't realize like this was a problem. And now that I do, I'm going to like do a PhD on this and like try to research this and try to figure this out. And like, you know, I think there's a lot there is still really good people on the planet. And I was watching a show this week where he was saying like one of the main things that humanity needs to understand is that we share a space with psychopaths. Like we're not the same species, but we're in the same space. And one of our biggest you know, deficiencies in this war has been not realizing that these people are not the same as us. And so number one is like understanding how they work as part of, you know, we're all part of humanity, but this is like a different subspecies where like it's we can't keep thinking that we're all the same and operating in the same, we're just in the same space. And so a lot of people are catching on to this now. Like when I was looking at the amount of information online of how to get away from like narcissistic abusers, like there's more content like than anybody could ever take in, and it just keeps getting better and better because people are starting to figure this stuff out and wise up to it. And these are the type of people that really want to help others. Like, you know what I mean? Like a lot of these people that were doing PhDs on narcissism, like they had all been like, oh no, I was married to one, like, and now it's my life mission to like make sure I can put this book out and help other people, you know what I mean? And this is why I always recommend that people start like educating themselves on, you know, psychopathy and narcissism and things like this, because this is what's happening globally, right? Like we are the people that are doing this. This is who they are. And so, you know, the more we start to understand the way they think, like then the power differential is leveled, right? Because we were just assuming that they were like the nice pastors, the nice counselors, the nice teachers. Like this is the where they got their power from is us thinking that they are like us, and they're not. And so you know, we're basically, as humanity, we're basically breaking up with abusers. And so, there's so much good research out there for understanding how this stuff works and understanding where your actual points of power are. And I actually really see that happening. Like, I really see so many people like have YouTube channels and stuff about, all this kind of breaking up with abusers, getting like, even the research and the literature on cults that's coming out is amazing. Like, I can't even keep up with it. Like, I'm trying to, I got like stacks of books here, and I'm trying to just get myself up to date on all of the current research that's coming out. And, I think these people that have like been abusers for so long, like, the good people are waking up and catching on and helping each other. And, it really is happening. Like, I'm not a doomsday prepper, because I realize how ignorant and cowardly, and like, I understand how these people are. Like, you know what I mean? They are not brave and strong, and they are none of these things. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, they once we start figuring this stuff out, like, it's already game over. I've said this before. Like, these people, like, they already know how much they're exposed. They really do. It's like, nobody's gonna go along with the society they want. They're
Exactly.
not.
Yes. I should say they've only gotten away with what they have so far, because how you were talking about with weaponizing shame, they do the same thing with compassion, empathy. They've learned the psychology of emotions, like you said, through science and through esotericism. There's so many different ways that they've, learned these different, mind control methods through all different ways, science and magic and whatever else. And they've deployed it on us. And so they've played with our emotions. And like you said, we're starting to realize that and be like, wait, even though they're doing and saying all the right things and they look like a normal person, like, something doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good anymore. There's something wrong. And like, we're starting to be able to identify with that, which I think is really cool. Because even more, more than ever, even today, you look at even political activists who were so into the, left-right paradigm. So many of them are even starting to be like, wait, something's wrong. Like, all the stuff that I advocated for all these years, something is weird. I'm starting to not believe what I'm being told. And, you're starting to sort of see even that mold break politically on a bigger scale, which I think is amazing, because that's a really big way too, that they have kind of this mind control method over societies by using things like politics to keep us, kind of occupied and fighting with each other. But one thing I wanted to ask you, going back to shame, breaking through that is monumental for a survivor's journey and for everybody. How can we as a society integrate ways to prevent shame better, whether it's in a therapeutic setting, on a friendship level? What are ways that we can do better for survivors in the future? What would be like your perfect world to see, survivors being able to come forward and disclose? Because whether we like it or not, more and more of them are.
I think people like getting, and this is like for all survivors, it's like getting back in connected to their autonomy and realizing they actually have a choice, and that everything from abusers is an offer or a suggestion. Like, they're offering you shame. They are offering you lies. Like, you actually have agency to say, no, thank you. Like, no, I'm not going to internalize the shame that you offered to me when I was young and naive. Like, I'm older now, I'm smarter now. I realize, like, this is an illusion. It's an offer. Like, there's an act of the will of you accepting it. Like, and so realizing you actually have that agency to like get to the point where you're like, no, thank you. I don't want to accept this offer of shame. Like, because that's what they're always doing. It's their shame. It's their shame that they're offering to us. And we have the choice to actually say, no, thank you. We don't accept your shame. We're not coming into alignment with it. We're not going to internalize it. Like, it's really getting to that and then practicing, right? Like, it's not like you're just going to figure that out once and then not have those shame flashbacks come up. So it's like, every time you have that shame flashback, it's like, again, using your agency, like, oh, I see this offer coming up again, and I'm going to use my agency to say, no, thank you. I don't take this as part of myself. I don't identify with this, like, it's not going to be easy. It's like, we have to work through it. And it's just, it's like, but we can do it together. We got to stop shaming each other and shaming ourselves. Like it's all an illusion. It's all fake. Like we don't have to be ashamed for stuff that has happened, or stuff that we've even evolved past. Like shame just keeps people frozen in time and space, and it's like, it's like, just let it go and move past it. And like, there's lots of ways to work on it, but like, also don't shame yourself for not being past. Don't shame yourself for being ashamed. You know what I mean? It's like, look at it, see it, talk with somebody about it, write it out in a journal. Like I think it's really getting to that point of realizing that it's fake. It's not real. It's something that is being offered to you, and just say, like, I see this for what it is. You know what I mean? It's again, it's all about projection. And that's why I always say, like, people talk about karma and order followers and all this stuff. And I really believe that the universe is mathematical and everything does get worked out. And one of the ways, like, we're never going to change abusers, but we can change ourselves in the way that we react to abusers. And so I always tell people to be really, really careful when you accept shame for somebody else, because you're basically taking on their karmic debt. And so they're always offering it, right? So whenever somebody's trying to shame you, what they're actually trying to say is like, here, why don't you take the karma for what I did? And if you say, oh, sure, okay, then like you've actually accepted it. And like, we need to say, hey, no, that's not mine. That's yours. You have to work it out. You know what I mean? And so it's just something to always be aware of when people are offering you their debt.
I could listen to you talk all day. It's so interesting hearing how like you break these things down, the metaphors that you use and the ways that you relate it to like people who haven't gone through it, or it might be a foreign concept to you. You figure out really clever ways to like relate it to people who it can be completely unfathomable to. And I love that about you. And you're absolutely right. I love that you said it's an offering. It's not something we have to carry. It doesn't mean it's ours just because we took it. If somebody gives us a gift, we can go through it in the trash, or we can return it, or we can give it back to the person that gave it to us and say, sorry, I don't want this. It's the same thing, except it's sort of the opposite of a gift, but the things that are offered to us, it's not a natural thing that we chose to believe. It's something that somebody else gave us. So I really love that you separated that from the person, that it's something that they took on. It's not something that was inherently theirs to keep, and that they can give it up at any time. And so regarding shame, I know we've covered a lot today. Was there other parts or other things that you wanted to contribute to the conversation, or that we didn't get to yet?
I'm just looking at kind of my notes here. I think we covered kind of most of it. I feel like I'm really tired today. I kind of just was like a fire hydrant, just kind of going all over the place. So hopefully it made sense to people and they can kind of follow it. But yeah, I think we kind of covered the basics. And like I said, we didn't go over all the psychology and like counseling of shame and stuff, but like there is some really good stuff online. You know what I mean? That it's just basic 101 kind of psychology stuff that, no matter who you are, just, it's like, take a look at it. But specifically, shame transfer and stuff is something that I think is really important. Again, when it comes down to the type of abuse that like you cover on this show, is just like, you know what I mean? And I just want to say to any survivor out there, like, I don't think any differently of any of the people that I've talked to that have told me something they're ashamed of. I've always looked at them and not agreed with them on it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just, I think we should all create a space, because that is really what's going to enable people to come forward, is to feel safe from more shame. And I just want to say to anybody listening out there, like you don't have to be ashamed. You don't have to hold shame. You don't have to let shame drive your behavior. And this belief that like nobody could ever know the truth about you and not feel like shameful towards you, that's a lie. And I just want to say that right now, like, I myself know that that's a lie. And anybody that's feeling that way, it's just not, it's not the truth. It's not the truth. No matter what's happened, you are redeemable, you are forgivable, you can change, you can you're lovable, and that's actually the truth.
Thank you for that. That's so powerful. I think it's easy to feel like that when you've had something horrible happen to you, But sometimes too, I think if you can separate yourself and think about if somebody else came up to you and said that I'm contaminated because I was abused, no person with a heart or soul would ever agree with that. Their first response would be, no, what are you talking about? No, you're not. How could you ever think that about yourself? And going back to my friend Kevin, like, I wish so bad somebody would have helped him scrub that from him, because that was something ultimately that like led to him not even wanting to be alive, which is so sad. And it's such an easy thing to extinguish from somebody and to help them overcome and to help them scrub off if we just recognize it whenever we see it and not gaslight it or, put somebody back into that space of shame. And like, we all have that power to do that for each other. Being abused, that's, again, like Jaymee said, that was something that happened to you. It's not something that you have to identify with. It's the abuser that needs to carry that shame and that contamination. They're the ones that did it, and it's a really powerful reminder, especially how I said at the beginning, going into the holidays and realizing that there's going to be a lot of sensitivities, a lot of triggering, a lot of shame. It can be a really hard time of year just in so many different ways. So I just really appreciate you coming on here and sharing about this hard topic with this really important topic today.
Can I just say one more thing? If you're going to release this out before Christmas, some specific Christmas shamers is like shame for not having money, shame, people like when they tell their kids that they're getting presents for being good, it's like poor kids are going to think they're not good because they didn't get presents, and that's a part of shame. People that have social anxiety and don't want to go be social and be around families, or be triggered because they don't have a family, that's something people can feel shame about. Like, there's just so much, like, I'm not like, if people want to enjoy the holidays, that's great. But like, just keeping in mind that like, it's such a trigger for so many people of what they don't have, whether that's like money, family, friends, like all, so it's just like keeping that in mind, like in a true spirit of like, maybe, not always just trying to like give presents and stuff, but like maybe just thinking about, like the things that people don't have and how it can be such a trigger for like not fitting into these kind of societal expectations and holidays and stuff. And like, I'm sure there's like a lot of survivors out there. This is the hardest time of year for a lot of people. And I think sometimes, just being the contrast in the mirror, like when people are really like celebrating everything they have, it can like just really contrast to what people don't have. And then people feel shame about that. So just keeping that in mind, that again, it's like, it's not necessary. It's really not necessary. And you're not alone. Like there is a lot of people, and so like during this time, like just try to connect with somebody else and just reach out and get through it together, because there's a lot of people that have a lot of shame come up over this time, or like people that don't have their kids with them, stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's just a lot. It can reactivate a lot of things for a lot of people at this time of year. And so a really nice thing that you actually can do for somebody is actually just to be available for them, even if it's like Zoom calls and stuff, just being there for somebody and being like, hey, you don't have to sit alone at home on Christmas, like let's Zoom together or something, or you know what I mean? Just like make sure somebody's not alone or like shame spiraling themselves in isolation down over the holidays. It's like a really actual real gift you can give somebody, is just even to be like a friend or be there, give your time or attention to them.
Amen. That was a really good closing note. And it's so relatable down to like a fundamental level of, just what everybody goes through on a basic level, not just ritual abuse, how shame really haunts us a lot during the holidays in so many different ways. So thank you so much, Jaymee. I feel like we could talk about this topic for like 24 hours. It's such a deep,
we could do a whole shame series. Honestly, it's so big.
I would love to.
Like this was just like a general overview show, but we could almost do like a specific show on every way that shame is used on humans. Anyways, thanks for having me on again. It's always
You're
so
welcome.
fun.
I would love to do that. You're welcome on any time, and we always love whenever you come on. And so I don't know if there's a way that people can connect with you, but I just wanted to, I know you do a lot of podcasts, so I wanted to just give you an opportunity to let people know where they could find more of your podcast and more of what you do. And then if there's ways to connect with you, how to do that.
I'm not really in one spot. So again, you can just type in Jaymee Jay, and sometimes if you put in SRA after, you'll get more specific videos on that. Because I'm a real generalist. Like, I do a lot of different things on different things, and kind of all over the place. And so yeah, and if people really want to get a hold of me, I don't really put my email on the show, but like you can always message any of the hosts of shows that I'm on and leave me your email, and that's the way you can connect with me if you want to talk with me one-on-one or have questions, or if you ever want like me to do a show or something on somebody, you can always send questions to the hosts and stuff too. And just that's kind of like the way that people can find me. But yeah, I do podcasts on all kinds of things, like forensic stuff, and it's really what my main interest is, like the difference of like good and evil, and people just people leveraging abuse over each other is really kind of the main theme that goes through all of my podcasts. And of course, ritual abuse is the pinnacle of that, and so I do a lot of shows on that as well. But yeah, there's kind of like a whole bunch of different things I do shows on. So yeah, you can find me if you look.
It's really fascinating. I encourage you guys to go look more into Jaymee's work. She does do just a myriad of different topics, and they're always really fascinating. They're always different. But they're always rooted in truth. And, it always comes back to survivors and how we can be better for them. And it's awesome. So we appreciate the work that you're doing, Jaymee. And like she said, you guys can message me your email. If you guys want to introduce yourself and just share, why you want to connect with Jaymee, just send it to my email, forward it to her. And then she can decide if that's something that she can help with, or, if it's okay for her to connect with you. So if you guys want to go ahead and message me, I'll pass it on to her. And then you guys can have a conversation with her as well. I'll have all my contact information below in the show notes. Also, all my other contact besides my email. Connect with me wherever you can. Like I said, if you're not on YouTube, I do have my channel fully up and going. So I'd love to see you guys in the chats every Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. If you guys want to join, really loving, beautiful community that we bring together as we premiere these episodes. And of course, if you guys want to be on the show, email me. If you guys have any inquiries yourself or information, feel free to email me, connect with me on social media. You guys are the reason that we do this. Thank you guys so much for supporting survivors, for every single guest on the show, and just for caring so much. It is amazing. Like Jaymee said, there's sort of a cascade of people speaking out, but there's also a cascade of people who care coming forward too and wanting to help. And that's all of you on the other side. If you're not a survivor, thank you so much for being here. And if you are a survivor, of course, this episode is dedicated to you today, and we hope that you guys found it helpful in some way. So do us a favor and share the episode if you can. Thank you so much for listening. God bless you all, and we will see you on the next episode.